The Berwyn Jazz Lounge buzzed with anticipation as Sebastian Drake slipped into his reserved seat, third row center, perfect for both viewing and acoustics. The familiar weight of solitude settled around him despite the packed venue, something he'd grown accustomed to in the decade since building Drake Properties into a real estate empire worth billions. Tonight's performance featured Ella Montgomery's quartet, a rising ensemble he'd discovered through his perpetual late-night jazz playlist habit. Sebastian checked his watch, a simple Patek Philippe that cost more than some people's homes but looked understated on his wrist. 7 minutes until showtime, just enough time to silence his phone and settle in. "Excuse me, is this seat 14? A melodic voice asked from his right. Sebastian looked up to see a woman with dark curls cascading over her shoulders, clutching a ticket and a small vintage handbag. Her emerald dress caught the dim lights of the lounge in a way that made her seem to glow from within. "Yes, seat 14 is right next to me," Sebastian replied, shifting slightly to allow her more room. "Thank you. I was beginning to worry I wouldn't make it. Traffic was brutal." She settled into her seat with the fluid grace of someone comfortable in their own skin. "The universe of Chicago traffic where time and space have no meaning," Sebastian offered with a smile. She laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to rise from deep within her. "I'm Grace Patterson." "Sebastian Drake," he replied automatically, extending his hand. Her grip was firm, her hand warm against his. The house lights dimmed before conversation could continue. The quartet took the stage to enthusiastic applause, and for the next hour and a half, Sebastian found himself torn between the haunting melodies flowing from the stage and the woman beside him who seemed to feel the music in a way that mirrored his own appreciation. During a particularly moving saxophone solo, Sebastian glanced sideways and caught Grace with her eyes closed, lips slightly parted, fingers subtly moving as if playing along with the notes. Something about that unguarded moment of pure connection to the music touched him unexpectedly. When intermission arrived, Sebastian turned to her. "Would you like a drink? I'd love one. Something with bubbles, maybe. I know just the thing." Sebastian made his way to the bar, bypassing the line with a nod to the bartender who recognized him from his regular visits. When he returned with 2 glasses of a rare champagne, Grace raised an eyebrow. "No waiting in line for you, I see." Sebastian handed her the delicate flute. "I sponsor the jazz series here, comes with a few perks." "That's generous," she said, taking a sip, her eyes widened. "This is incredible." "What is it?" Krug closed Dambonnet. "I think the 2002 is drinking beautifully right now." "Well, thank you, Sebastian. I don't usually drink champagne that costs more than my rent." Her tone was light, but her eyes were assessing him with newfound interest. "You're a jazz enthusiast?" he asked, steering away from anything that highlighted the wealth disparity between them. "My father played trumpet with some of the greats in the 70s and 80s. I grew up with this music in my blood." "That's fascinating. Anyone I might have heard of?" Grace smiled proudly. "Probably. He toured with Herbie Hancock for a few years, left the road when I was born but never stopped playing." "That's incredible. Is he still performing?" A shadow passed over her face. "He had a stroke 3 years ago. His playing days are over, but he still listens. I record these performances for him." Sebastian noticed the small, high-quality recording device peeking out from her bag. "That's really beautiful." The conversation flowed easily between them, and Sebastian was surprised to find himself discussing music theory and favorite albums rather than fielding the usual questions about his wealth or business that dominated most of his initial interactions with women. When the lights dimmed for the second half, Sebastian found himself acutely aware of Grace's presence beside him, the subtle scent of her perfume, the way she occasionally leaned slightly toward him when something particularly moved her. The final piece was a mournful ballad that seemed to touch something deep inside both of them. Sebastian felt Grace's pinky finger brush against his on the armrest they shared. Neither moved away. As the audience rose for a standing ovation, Sebastian and Grace stood together, their shoulders touching. This was Grace began. Remarkable, Sebastian finished. I meant the music, she said with a teasing smile. So did I, mostly. He returned her smile. Would you like to grab a coffee? There's a great late-night place around the corner. Grace hesitated, glancing at her watch. I should probably get home. I have an early class tomorrow. You're a student? Sebastian asked, his interest piqued further. A teacher, actually. Music theory at Chicago Arts Academy. Sebastian's eyes lit up. I'm on the board there, really. Grace looked surprised. Small world. Increasingly smaller, it seems. Sebastian found himself reluctant to end the evening. Rain, check on that coffee then. Grace tilted her head, considering him. I'd like that. She pulled out her phone. Your number, Sebastian recited it, watching as she created a new contact. His phone buzzed a moment later with a text that simply read, Jazz girl. So I stand out in your contacts, she explained with a smile. It was wonderful meeting you, Sebastian. The pleasure was all mine, Grace. As she walked away, Sebastian remained in place, watching her disappear into the crowd. For the first time in years, the prospect of returning to his empty penthouse felt distinctly unappealing. The following morning, Sebastian found himself distracted during a meeting about a new waterfront development. His thoughts kept drifting to Grace the way the music had seemed to flow through her, the genuine interest in her eyes when he spoke, the way she'd made him feel like just a man enjoying jazz rather than Sebastian Drake, the real estate tycoon. Sebastian, your thoughts on the proposal? His CFO's voice pulled him back to reality. Sorry, Stanley, the numbers look solid. I want to review the environmental impact again before we proceed. His assistant handed him a coffee as the meeting concluded. You have the charity gala committee at noon, the zoning board at 2, and dinner with the Shanghai investors at 7. Sebastian nodded, then paused. Sarah, can you find me information on the music department at Chicago Arts Academy, specifically about their faculty? Sarah raised an eyebrow but nodded. Of course. Anything in particular? Just curious about their programs, he said casually. By afternoon, Sebastian had a file on his desk about the music department, including a short bio of Grace Patterson, assistant professor of music theory and composition. The photo showed her in a professional setting, hair pulled back, but with the same vibrant spark in her eyes he'd noticed the night before. His phone buzzed with a text message, Grace. I can't stop thinking about that final piece last night. Have you heard their first album? The studio version doesn't capture what we experienced live. Sebastian felt a ridiculous surge of pleasure at her reaching out. Sebastian, I have it, but you're right. Something magical about live jazz. Speaking of magic, how about that coffee tomorrow evening? The three dots appeared, disappeared, then reappeared. Sebastian found himself holding his breath. Grace, tomorrow works. There's a place called Melodies near campus. 6 p.m. Sebastian, I'll be there. He put down his phone, surprised at how light he felt. The Shanghai investors would have to meet with his VP instead. Melody's coffee was a far cry from Sebastian's usual establishments. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the rich scent of freshly ground beans created an atmosphere of casual creativity. Sebastian arrived early, choosing a quiet corner table with 2 comfortable armchairs. He deliberately dressed down in dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater rather than his usual tailored suit. The barista did a double take when he ordered, likely recognizing him from recent coverage in Chicago Business Monthly's 40 Under 40 issue, but thankfully said nothing. The door chimed and Grace walked in, cheeks flushed from the autumn chill. She wore jeans, boots, and a deep blue sweater that made her eyes appear even more striking. Her hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and she carried a worn leather messenger bag. Hey, she said, sliding into the chair across from him. Have you been waiting long? Just long enough to secure the best spot in the house, Sebastian replied with a smile. What can I get you? Oh, I can get my own, please. I insist, Grace relented. Cappuccino, then, with an extra shot. When Sebastian returned with their drinks, Grace was looking at her phone with a concerned expression. Everything okay? He asked. She put the phone away. Just checking on my dad. The home care nurse sometimes has trouble getting him to take his evening medication. That must be difficult managing his care while working full-time. Grace wrapped her hands around her mug. It's challenging. Worth it, though. He sacrificed so much for me growing up. Now it's my turn. Tell me about him, Sebastian said, genuinely interested. Grace's face lit up as she spoke about her father's music career, how he'd taught her piano from age 4, and his encyclopedic knowledge of jazz history. Sebastian found himself captivated not just by her words but by the passion behind them. I'm sorry, she said after a while. I didn't mean to ramble about family history. Don't apologize. It's refreshing to hear someone speak so lovingly about their family. What about yours? Grace asked. Are your parents still around? Sebastian's expression shifted slightly. My father passed when I was in college. Mother lives in Arizona now. We're not particularly close. I'm sorry to hear that, Grace said, her eyes full of genuine empathy rather than pity. It's fine. I had a privileged upbringing by any standard, just emotionally austere. Grace nodded. Money doesn't shield us from the hard stuff, does it? No, Sebastian agreed, struck by her insight. It just gives us different problems. The conversation flowed easily from their music they loved, books they'd read, places they'd traveled. Sebastian found himself laughing more than he had in months, maybe years. So, Grace said eventually, the board at Chicago Arts Academy, how did that happen? Sebastian hesitated. My company made a significant donation to their building fund a few years ago. The board position came with it. Ah, Grace nodded slowly. Sebastian Drake of Drake Properties. I should have made the connection sooner. Does it matter? He asked, suddenly tense. Grace studied him for a moment. It explains the champagne line skipping and the way the barista nearly fell over when you ordered. She smiled softly. But no, it doesn't change anything about our conversation. Relief flooded through him. Good, because I've enjoyed talking with you more than anyone I've met in a very long time. Same here, Grace admitted. Though I have to wonder what a real estate magnate sees in a music teacher who lives in a one-bedroom apartment with too many vinyl records. A kindred spirit, Sebastian said simply. Someone who feels music the way I do. Grace's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it and sighed. I'm sorry, I need to take this. It's the nurse. She stepped outside to take the call. When she returned, her expression was troubled. I'm really sorry, but I need to go. Dad's having a rough evening and the nurse can't seem to calm him down. Sebastian stood immediately. Of course. Can I help somehow? That's sweet, but no, he gets confused sometimes. New people can make it worse. Let me at least get you a car, Sebastian, please. It'll be faster than waiting for a rideshare. Grace relented, and Sebastian had his driver there within minutes. At the curb, she turned to him. I really enjoyed this, despite the abrupt ending. We'll do it again, Sebastian said confidently. Maybe dinner next time, Grace smiled. I'd like that. On impulse, Sebastian leaned in and kissed her cheek. Go take care of your dad. Her skin was warm under his lips, and the brief contact left him wanting more. I'll text you, she promised, before climbing into the car. Sebastian watched until the taillights disappeared around the corner, then walked to his own waiting vehicle, thinking about the way her eyes crinkled when she laughed, and the passionate way she spoke about music. Over the next few weeks, Sebastian and Grace saw each other whenever their schedules allowed. They attended another jazz performance, this time at a tiny club where the musicians played mere feet from their table. Sebastian took her to dinner at a small Italian restaurant where the owner knew him not as a wealthy businessman, but as a loyal customer who appreciated authentic cuisine. Grace introduced him to her favorite record store, a cramped space filled with treasures where Sebastian spent far too much money on vintage vinyl. They walked along the lakeshore on unseasonably warm November afternoons, talking about everything and nothing. Sebastian found himself scheduling meetings around the possibility of seeing Grace, something his assistant noticed but wisely didn't mention. For her part, Grace arranged for more reliable home care for her father, creating space in her life for this unexpected relationship. What neither of them acknowledged was the growing intensity of their connection. When their hands touched, an electric current seemed to pass between them. Their goodnight kisses grew longer, more heated, until both pulled away breathless and reluctant. After 3 weeks of dating, Sebastian invited Grace to his penthouse for dinner. He'd considered taking her to one of Chicago's finest restaurants, but decided against it. He wanted her in his space, wanted to cook for her himself rather than impressing her with wealth and connections. Grace arrived carrying a bottle of wine that Sebastian knew cost more than she should be spending. The gesture touched him deeply. "Your place is." She began, looking around at the floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing Chicago's skyline, the minimalist but clearly expensive furnishings, the original artwork on the walls. "Too much?" Sebastian asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Beautiful," she finished, "but it doesn't feel lived in." Sebastian looked around with fresh eyes. "No, I suppose it doesn't. I'm not here much between work and travel." "No personal touches," Grace observed, running her finger along a pristine shelf devoid of photographs or mementos. "I've never been big on sentiment," Sebastian admitted, though the words felt hollow as he said them. Grace wandered toward his piano, a Steinway grand that dominated one corner of the living area. "Do you play?" "Not well. I bought it with good intentions. May I?" Sebastian nodded, watching as Grace sat at the bench, her fingers hovering over the keys with reverence before beginning to play. The melody was gentle, something classical that Sebastian vaguely recognized but couldn't name. "Debussy," she said, noting his expression. "Claire de Lune." "One of my favorites." Sebastian stood transfixed as she played, her eyes closed, body swaying slightly with the music. In that moment, watching her create beauty in his sterile home, Sebastian realized he was falling in love with her. The thought should have terrified him. Instead, it felt like the most natural revelation in the world. When Grace finished playing, she looked up to find Sebastian watching her intently. "What?" she asked, suddenly self-conscious. Sebastian moved to sit beside her on the bench. "You're extraordinary," he said simply, then kissed her. Unlike their previous kisses, this one held nothing back. Grace's arms wound around his neck as Sebastian pulled her closer. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing heavily. "I should check on dinner," Sebastian said reluctantly. "It can wait," Grace whispered, pulling him back to her. Later, they ate Sebastian's slightly overcooked risotto at the dining table, stealing glances at each other between bites. Grace's hair was mussed from his fingers, her lips slightly swollen from his kisses. Sebastian had never seen anything more beautiful. "Stay tonight," he said suddenly. Grace looked up at him, her expression serious. "Sebastian, she put down her fork. "I need you to understand something. I'm not looking for a wealthy benefactor or a way out of my life. I love teaching. I love my small apartment with too many records. I won't be a charity case." "Is that what you think this is?" Sebastian asked, hurt flickering across his face. "No," Grace said quickly. "But I know how these things can look, how they can evolve. I've seen it happen to friends." Sebastian reached across the table for her hand. "Grace, I'm falling in love with you. Not because I want to rescue you or because I think you need my money, because you make me feel alive in a way I haven't in years, maybe ever." Grace's eyes widened. "You're falling in love with me, completely, inconveniently, wonderfully." A slow smile spread across Grace's face. "Well, that's fortunate, because I'm falling in love with you too." Sebastian stood, pulling her to her feet and into his arms. "Stay tonight," he repeated. This time Grace nodded. Morning light filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Sebastian's bedroom, casting a golden glow over Grace as she slept beside him. Sebastian had been awake for an hour, simply watching her, the gentle rise and fall of her chest, the way her curls spread across his pillow, the small smile that occasionally curved her lips even in sleep. He'd had women in his bed before, of course. Relationships that lasted weeks or months, usually ending when they wanted more of him than he was willing to give more time, more attention, more emotional connection. Or when he discovered they were more interested in his bank account than in him as a person. But this felt different. Grace had shown no interest in his wealth. If anything, she seemed mildly uncomfortable with it. What she wanted was simply him, his thoughts, his company, his passion for music and life. It was both terrifying and exhilarating. Grace stirred, her eyes fluttering open. For a moment, confusion crossed her face before recognition dawned. "Morning," she murmured, her voice husky with sleep. "Good morning," Sebastian replied, leaning down to kiss her forehead. "How long have you been watching me sleep?" she asked, stretching like a contented cat. "Not long." "Liar," she said with a smile. "It's creepy, you know." "It's admiration," he corrected, tracing the line of her jaw with his finger. Grace captured his hand, pressing a kiss to his palm. "What time is it?" "Just after 7. I should get going. I have a 9 o'clock class." Sebastian tightened his arm around her waist. "Call in sick," Grace laughed. "Some of us have responsibilities that can't be delegated, Mr. CEO. "Fair point," Sebastian conceded. "Can I at least make you breakfast before you go?" Grace considered this. "Do you actually know how to cook breakfast, or will it be like the risotto?" The risotto wasn't that bad. It was enthusiastically prepared. Sebastian tickled her sides in retaliation, and Grace's laughter filled the room. The sound did something to Sebastian's heart, opened it wider somehow. "I can make excellent coffee and passable eggs," he promised, "and I have it on good authority that I make toast like a professional." Well, with credentials like that, how can I refuse? In the kitchen, Grace sat at the counter watching Sebastian move efficiently around the space. He was dressed only in pajama pants, and she admired the play of muscles in his back as he reached for mugs from a high shelf. "So," she said, accepting the coffee he handed her, "does the great Sebastian Drake have any meetings that can't be delegated today?" Sebastian glanced at her over his shoulder. "Nothing that can't be rescheduled." Grace raised an eyebrow. "Really? No skyscrapers to build, no millions to make?" "The skyscrapers can wait," Sebastian said, turning to face her. "I was thinking of taking a personal day." "A personal day? Do billionaires take those? This one might start." Sebastian cracked eggs into a bowl. "Actually, I've been thinking about scaling back a bit. Because of me." Grace asked, suddenly serious. Sebastian considered the question as he whisked the eggs. "Not entirely, but you've reminded me there's more to life than acquisitions and board meetings." He poured the eggs into a heated pan. "I built this company from nothing after my father died. For years, it was all I had, all I wanted. And now," Sebastian looked at her directly, "now I want more, different things." The weight of his words hung between them. Grace sipped her coffee, processing what he was really saying. "I should warn you," she said finally, "I'm a package deal. My dad's health isn't going to improve. He'll always be part of my life, my responsibility." "I know," Sebastian said simply. "I'd like to meet him sometime, if you think he'd be up for it." Grace's expression softened. "He'd like that. He's having a good week, maybe this weekend. It's a date." Sebastian slid a plate of surprisingly good-looking eggs in front of her. "Speaking of your dad, I've been thinking." Grace's guard immediately went up. "Sebastian, just hear me out. There's a new neurological rehabilitation center opening next month. Drake Properties developed the building, so I know the program well. They're doing incredible work with stroke recovery." Grace put down her fork. "We can't afford something like that." "I'm on the board," Sebastian continued carefully. "They have a scholarship program for promising candidates." "My father isn't a charity case, Sebastian." "I know that, but he is a legendary musician who contributed significantly to American jazz. That makes him exactly the kind of candidate this program was designed for." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "You're not just saying this." "I would never lie to you, Grace, not about something this important." She studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or pity. Finding none, she nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. Talk to his doctors. That's all I ask." Grace checked her watch and sighed. "I really do have to go now." Sebastian walked her to the door. "Dinner tonight, your place this time?" "Sure," Grace agreed. "But be warned, it's about 1/10 the size of this place." "More cozy that way," Sebastian said, pulling her in for a kiss. "I'll bring wine." "Nothing too expensive," Grace warned. "I don't own proper wine glasses," Sebastian laughed. Noted. After Grace left, Sebastian returned to the kitchen, smiling to himself as he cleaned up. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this content, this hopeful about the future. His phone buzzed with a text from Grace. "Left my favorite cardigan." "Excuse to see you again," Sebastian texted back. As if you needed an excuse, over the next few months, Sebastian and Grace settled into a rhythm. They spent weeknights at her cozy apartment, in an artistic neighborhood far from Sebastian's luxury high-rise. Weekends were often at his place, where Grace gradually added touches that made the space feel more lived in photographs on shelves, a throw blanket she'd knitted during her college years, books and vinyl records scattered on previously immaculate surfaces. Sebastian met Grace's father, George Patterson, on a good day when the older man's mind was clear. Though physically diminished by his stroke, George's intellect and musical knowledge remained sharp. He recognized Sebastian from business news and was initially suspicious of his daughter's wealthy boyfriend. "So, you're the billionaire who's dating my little girl," George said bluntly, his speech slightly slurred but understandable. "Dad," Grace warned. "It's fine," Sebastian said, taking a seat beside George's wheelchair. "Yes, sir, though technically I'm only a multi-millionaire," George snorted. "Only, what do you know about jazz, rich boy, Dad?" But Sebastian smiled. "Not as much as you, I'm sure. But I know enough to recognize that your work with Herbie Hancock changed the direction of fusion jazz in the early '80s. Your solo on Watermelon Man still gives me chills." George's eyebrows shot up. "You've listened to my recordings?" "Every one I could find." "Grace mentioned you never released that experimental session from '85. I'd love to hear it sometime." A slow smile spread across George's face. "Grace, your young man might be all right after all." After that initial meeting, Sebastian visited George regularly, sometimes with Grace, sometimes alone. He brought rare jazz recordings, books on music theory, and most importantly, his time and attention. George began to improve, his speech becoming clearer, his mobility increasing incrementally. The Neurological Rehabilitation Center Sebastian had mentioned accepted George into their program. Though Grace initially resisted, the results were undeniable. Within 2 months, George was able to hold a trumpet again, even if he couldn't yet play it. "You've given him hope," Grace told Sebastian one evening as they watched George working with his physical therapist. "I haven't seen that in him since before the stroke." Sebastian shook his head. "I just made a few calls, the program did the rest." "It's more than that," Grace insisted. "You listen to him, you value his knowledge and experience, that matters more than the therapy." Sebastian squeezed her hand. "He's a remarkable man. Now I know where you get it." As winter turned to spring, Sebastian found himself spending more time at Grace's small apartment than his own luxurious penthouse. He kept clothes in her closet, had his own key, and even brought over his expensive coffee maker when he discovered her preference for strong morning brew. One rainy April evening, they sat on her small balcony, protected from the drizzle by an awning, listening to the patter of raindrops and the distant sounds of the city. "Move in with me," Sebastian said suddenly. Grace looked over at him in surprise. "To your penthouse?" "No," Sebastian replied. "I'm selling it." "What? Why?" Sebastian took her hand. "Because it's not home, not anymore. Home is wherever you are." Grace's eyes widened. "Sebastian, I've been looking at houses," he continued. "Places with character, history. Enough room for your father to have his own space when he's ready to leave the rehab center. A music room for your lessons and his playing when he gets back to it. You've thought about all this." "I've thought about little else," Sebastian admitted. "I want a life with you, Grace. A real life, not split between two worlds." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "What about your company?" "It will continue to run. I've been delegating more, trusting my team. They're more than capable." "And what will people say?" "The great Sebastian Drake, moving to a neighborhood that's not even remotely prestigious." Sebastian laughed. "Let them talk. I've spent too many years caring what others think." Grace leaned over and kissed him softly. "Ask me again." "Move in with me," Sebastian repeated. "Not because it makes sense financially or logistically, because I love you and I want to build a home with you." "Yes," Grace said simply. "I'd love that." Sebastian reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. "I had another question planned for tonight, but perhaps it's too soon." Grace's breath caught as he opened the box to reveal a vintage Art Deco ring, a modest diamond surrounded by sapphires. "It was my grandmother's," Sebastian explained. "The only woman in my family who married for love rather than social standing or money." "It's beautiful," Grace whispered. Like you, Sebastian said, suddenly feeling nervous despite his usual confidence. Grace Patterson, I know we haven't known each other that long, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Will you marry me? Grace's eyes filled with tears. Are you sure? I come with a lot of complications, my dad, my modest career. Those aren't complications, Sebastian interrupted. They're part of what makes you the woman I love. Grace took a deep breath. Then yes, I'll marry you. Sebastian slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into his arms as the rain continued to fall around them, creating a gentle soundtrack to the beginning of their future together. 6 months later, Sebastian and Grace married in a small ceremony at the jazz club where they'd first met. George Patterson, now walking with a cane but standing tall, played a wavering but beautiful trumpet solo for their first dance. Sebastian's mother attended, seeming genuinely happy for her son and impressed with his choice of bride. The couple honeymooned in New Orleans, immersing themselves in the birthplace of jazz. Before returning to the historic brownstone, Sebastian had purchased and renovated to include state-of-the-art accessibility features for George and a music studio where both Grace and her father could teach and play. Sebastian continued to run Drake Properties, but with a new perspective and balance that actually improved the company's performance. Grace expanded her teaching to include private students in their home studio while maintaining her position at the academy. 1 year to the day after they met, Sebastian and Grace returned to the Berwyn Jazz Lounge for an anniversary celebration. As they took their seats, the same ones they'd occupied that fateful night, Sebastian leaned over to kiss his wife. "Thank you," he whispered. "For what?" Grace asked, her eyes shining with happiness. "For sitting next to me that night, for changing everything." Grace smiled, placing his hand over her stomach where their first child had just begun to grow news she would share with him tonight after the performance. "Thank you for making room in your life for a jazz teacher with too many records and a complicated family situation." "Best decision I ever made," Sebastian said as the house lights dimmed and the music began to play. As the first notes filled the air, Sebastian and Grace turned their attention to the stage, their fingers intertwined, their hearts beating in perfect rhythm, a harmony neither had expected to find, but both now couldn't imagine living without.